Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And a couple of, I guess we will call these clean and simple cards, which those that have followed me are aware. And if you're new, welcome. I don't do clean and simple very often. I like throwing everything but the kitchen sink in my cards. However, these stamps that I use today, they're from Trinity Stamps, and they are just large text, and they take up an entire A2 card front. So other than going bigger, which you totally could, do a 5x7 card, gives you a little more real estate to add in, everything but the kitchen sink. However, I kept it to A2. I actually pulled a couple of background stamps. So that's one way to step things up a bit because it adds a little bit of texture, and I did it subtle. And then I did some coloring, and I even pulled out some color pencils, which I have not used my color pencils in eons. But I use them to add a bit more like shading, a little bit of dimension. And then I'll show another thing too, a couple other ways too, to just very subtle ways to just kind of step it up, So, as always, links to everything I used will be in the description box below the video. If you just expand it, it'll all be listed there. All of my links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links and place an order, I get a little kickback from it at no cost to you guys, and that's what helps pay the bills, keeps the lights on, keeps this channel running, etc. And I'll have a link to my blog post, etc. All the things, always in the description box below. And then keep watching, and I will show you guys how I made these cards. So like I said in the intro, the first thing I did was grab a couple of background stamps, which the text one I've used a million times. So many times. I love it. And this is the Simon Says stamp, thank you text background stamp. And I just put my background stamps face up on my work surface, ink them up, press the cardstock into it. If you are, depending on what you're doing and what kind of background stamp you're using, yes, you can totally use this in a stamp positioner. I've had people ask me that, like, why do I do it like this? It's a little more risky. You don't get as perfect of an impression, etc., etc. This is how I've been using background stamps for 20 years. Old school, man. If it's the type of stamp though that I want, the thing to make sure it's fully stamped or stamp it more than once, etc., 100% use a stamp positioner. But for this, it works. So that first one was a text background, and I'm using Neenah Desert Storm cardstock. One of my favorites. It's great. It's perfect. I love it. I will never not love Neenah Desert Storm. It's just the perfect like craft color. So I'm using Desert Storm cardstock, and this is subtle for both of these. I am using Simon's LATTE Pawsitively saturated ink, which stamps a little bit darker. This will fade back to very, very subtle, but that's what I want. It just gives it that little extra something. If you want it to be more obvious, depending whether you're using this exact sort of, stamp, same idea, etc. Another option would be just a slightly darker ink, like a shade darker, which with Simon's, it would be cappuccino. Or you could use white pigment ink. I almost used white pigment ink, but instead decided to go with just a little more subtle, which I know some of you are very shocked. But, I like subtle too, sometimes. I make up for it, though, in the next project or two, when then I do like 15 different types of splatter, 3 different types of bling. I always make up for it. Anyway, that second background was the not quite a dot background. So I got my background stamped. And then I'm stamping these text stamps. The one is just called Brighter Days Ahead. The other one is called Better Than Email. And I love them. They're Trinity Stamps has several. I'll have a link to all their products in the description box below the video. They've got several of these, and for whatever reason, I generally avoid stuff like this. I don't know why. I overthink it. That's why. I overthink it, and it's like, I can't make this impressive enough to do a video on. Welcome to inside my brain space as a content creator. So I've avoided them. But I was looking at them the other day, and I was like, these are great. And, I can use these. Why not? They're fun. And I like that they take up the whole card. And you don't need to do 5 million things. Anyway, I stamped both of those stamps onto the respective backgrounds using Simon Says Stamp's Intense Black ink, which is a alcohol marker friendly ink. And then for my coloring, I'm using this time my Spectrum Noir TriBlends. I will link at the end of this video to my playlist that has many. I have done dozens of videos using these markers. They are great. I will not compare, in a sense, these to Copics, to Olo markers. People, it's all up to personal preference. And me, again, being not only a content creator, but also someone who loves color and someone who just really enjoys trying new tools, all the different things. I have, multiple options. You don't need all the options. You don't need to get all the things. Whatever your coloring preferences and what you use, great. These are great little option. They're definitely one of the more affordable ones. And I've been happy with them, but I'm not going to give up my other options. So anywho, I did all this coloring. That first little bit of the coloring was in real time. I do not color as fast as it looks on video after the magic of video editing that I, speed everything up. And I kept the coloring simple. I only used a handful of markers, each one with the TriBlends that's why they're a TriBlend. There's a light, a medium, and a dark for the most part. That is one of my pet peeves with the TriBlends is some of their combos, don't blend as well as they should, and I just kind of shake my head at the thought process behind it. But I love the convenience of it because, you grab one marker, you got 3 shades. Perfect. The other thing I love is, like I said, the Desert Storm cardstock. There's something about the look of whether it's ink blending or coloring with alcohol markers, just how things look on craft cardstock. I really like it. And again, this will work with any alcohol marker. And the thing to remember is when you are coloring with pretty much anything, if you're doing alcohol markers or if you're doing ink blending with dye inks, anything on cardstock other than white, everything's going to look different. It's going to look different because while the ink is still wet, even with alcohol markers, it's wet when it goes on, it dries fairly quickly. Is to just keep that in mind, is that things will look different. And that's another reason why I love the craft cardstock, because I like the way it gives it just a little, it kind of tones it down a bit, even though I love me bright colors, obviously. It's just fun. It just gives it a different look. So after I did all the coloring, I pulled out just a white color pencil. And like I said in the intro, I have not used my color pencils in many years. The reason I stopped coloring with them, because that's what we used to do back in the day before we had 5 million options, was color pencils. I stopped doing it because they holding them and coloring with them and the pressure needed, etc., really aggravates the issues I have with my hands and wrists. And I just couldn't do it anymore. But I pulled out this white one and I used it for this little banner because white obviously will show up nicely on craft. And I can't show the pressure I used, but I was using very light pressure and I just kind of built it up that way. And I colored in that banner, just gave it that nice little bit. So, gives it the hint of white. And then I decided to pull out just sort of a brownie shade of color pencil. And I'm using that to add shading. This is another way to step things up. Whether it's like text, like fonts and things like this, or it's an actual like floral image or critters, whatever it is. Adding some shading, some shadows around it, etc., is another way to completely change and step up your image to like ground it, give it a bit of depth, some definition, etc. And you don't have to use a color pencil for this. You could use, I could have just used, a grayish or a brown marker. I've done that before as well. And it's worth the little bit of extra time to add that bit of shading. It really does make things kind of pop. So I went around with that pencil and did that on the first panel. I'm repeating the exact same thing on the second one, just doing the colors in a different order, but I'm using the exact same markers, everything. And I've, again, super sped this up. This was one of those things, and I do get asked this at times, not as much as I used to, because I don't time myself when I'm coloring. I don't. Sometimes I'm aware because obviously I'm filming, so I can see like the length of the footage, but I try not to. I don't sit and look at a clock. With this, I had music going and was just in the zone. I was enjoying listening to the music and just filling in all these little areas with the markers and having a great little time. So I went through, colored everything with the markers again. Once they were colored, I pulled out that white Prismacolor pencil. It doesn't matter what brand. I've got Prismacolors. They're great. I have what's that other brand? Now my brain stopped. Whatever. Doesn't need to be fancy though. I've used Crayola, color pencils, and they've been fine. And especially for things like this, when you're adding just little bits of shading and stuff, it doesn't need to be fancy. So after I did all my coloring, this is another way to step it up, is using a wafer die that not only die cuts, but adds a little extra detail. And this is one of the Trinity Stamps modern embossed rectangle wafer dies. So that it's a stacking set with like multiple sizes. And I love this set. I forgot I had it. I've shown it in other videos, but it debosses a frame around the edge while it die cuts. Love this. I put this into my little bin where I keep my most used wafer dies and like all my basics, rectangles, circles, etc. I need to use this set more often because I love that subtle frame it creates. Another option is like anything with like a stitching or piercing detail, that's another way to step up. Otherwise, fairly simple cards is wafer dies that add that little just extra bit of detail. So another way, gel pens. My go-to jelly roll, this is the 10, so this is the widest one, white gel pen that I use in all my videos. The thing to always remember with gel pens, you need to use them consistently. Not every day, but consistently. If it sits for weeks, months, forever at a time, they do dry out in a sense. Like they'll dry out in the little ball point, and then they just don't work anymore. Sometimes you can get them going again if you like kind of scribble them on your hands, like the heat from your hands and whatnot will sometimes get the little roller ball moving depending on the brand. But the biggest thing to always remember, if you just use it somewhat consistently. I have never had an issue with these jelly roll pens. I used up one recently. Like it took me a long time considering how many times I use my gel pens. It was not acting very well at the end, and I was like, why is this being weird? Yeah, because I used it up. There was no ink left in it. So anyway, using a white gel pen, it's another way to step this up. I added little highlights just randomly, and then I added little dot detail because in the back of my head, I was thinking about splatter. You guys know, I was like, oh, that's the way to step it up. It is. But instead, I just used the gel pen and added little like kind of starburst and little dots here and there. Just adds little details, So I did all of that, set those aside. My card bases are top folding A2 white note cards. And I stamped sentiments from those sets. There's a couple of little individual sentiments in those stamp sets. So I stamped those onto the insides of the cards with the same intense black ink. And then I used the 2 heart stamps from the Better Than Email set. And I stamped those on the insides with Simon's Sweets Positively Saturated ink. So did all of this in my MISTI so that I could ink up the stamps multiple times. I've talked about this in recent videos. I'm working more on just lightly tapping my ink pads and just lightly stamping and then doing it multiple times. Just build it up to, what it should be rather than like smushing the ink pads into the stamp and then smushing the stamp onto the cardstock. If you use a lighter hand and just do it multiple times, you get a better impression. And then there's less chance that, your sentiments are fuzzy or smushy or whatever. So hopefully that helps. Last tip for stepping it up, dimension. I have talked about this in many videos. When I tend towards more clean and simple, foam tape or, foam squares, etc. dimension. That is another way to just give everything a little extra, without throwing the kitchen sink at it. So this time I used regulation thickness foam tape. This is the Altenew foam tape. A lot of people have been asking me about this. I really like it. It's great. It's your standard thickness. This foam tape's awesome. The price point is great compared to the old Scotch 3M stuff that's now like a fortune for that foam tape. And that other stuff like turns yellow over time. I haven't noticed this with the Altenew stuff. So love it. So anyway, pop those up with foam tape and that finish off the cards. So yes, I did not. Another thing would be to add bling, splatter, all the things. However, every once in a while, I decide not to do that. But don't worry. I will have many videos coming, as always, using the splatters and the baker's twine and the bling and all the fun things like I normally do. That said, I really enjoyed making these. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and maybe learned a thing or two. Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys so very much for watching, commenting, thumbs upping, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!